Okay.
Okay. Alrighty. I'll tell you a little bit about myself in a few seconds, but before I do that, I want to do two things. First of all, I want to thank the League for the work that they have done and continue to do. The League of Women Voters has, in my estimation, been the absolute rock in trying to protect election rights and pushing issues that need to be pushed within the election process. And as you'll discover, elections are my biggest interest, and so that's why it's so important. I really would love to thank all of the presidents to the League that I've known over the years, the work that they did for the Board of Elections, which was incredible, and frankly, we could have done a number of things without the help that they gave us. So I just want to Secondly, did you all notice the title to the presentation? It kind of had two questions. It said, what would happen if the president ordered the EAC to decertify every election machine in the country? Well, that brings a question to, and the first question probably is a number of folks would say, what is the EAC? Not to be confused with the FEC. The second question was, what if the League of Women Voters sued to stop it? And frankly, I think they would win. And frankly, they already have to some degree. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about. There's a nonpartisan, and I say nonpartisan genuinely because I've talked to so many Democrats and Republicans alike who've expressed concern regarding the consequences of the recent executive order by the President of the United States. It seeks to put the control of the elections in this country in the hands of the executive branch, which is really very concerning. It clearly attempts to undermine the authority of Congress, and frankly, it is illegal. Okay? Now, although I've worn many hats over the years, and it's kind of like the things that I've experienced actually is what brought me to this presentation, not necessarily the titles that I may have had. For those of you who don't know me, or may not have kept up with me since my retirement, I'm the former commissioner of the Monroe County Board of Elections. I'm the former chair of the New York State Election Commissioners Association. I served on a number of state board committees regarding the implementation of Help America Vote Act, and served as the interface with the federal and state agencies dealing with cybersecurity with regards to elections. Today, I'm still actively involved as I'm one of the 35 members from across the nation of the Board of Advisors to the Election Assistance Commission. That's the EAC. What I'm going to talk about today is the presidential order and, quote, preserving and protecting the integrity of American elections. And I'm going to talk about how it attacks the separation of powers that has always ensured fair and accurate elections. And to be honest with you, this issue in terms of how it's out there goes back to 1993 when the National Voter Registration Act, known as Motor Voter, was passed. And there's certain elements of that law that frankly still govern today so many of the things that we do in elections. Okay? Now, for the purpose of the discussion on voting machines, I want to start at one spot because it's kind of the tipping point. It's kind of the point at which it really became evident. And there are hours of discussions that could be had on voting machines and how they might function differently, or what they might do, or the history of them from when we started, or what have you. But that's the starting point. And the starting point is Bush versus Gore. Now, not everybody in this room is probably familiar with this, but this is the Supreme Court case where hanging chads and butterfly ballots created a huge election problem in Florida, and frankly, the Supreme Court decided the election. Because Florida made the difference. If Florida went one way, it was one candidate. If Florida went the other way, it was the other candidate. So in essence, for the first time in our history, the Supreme Court actually decided the election. Okay, the hanging chads were the most published issue, and probably the worst. But what is unknown by folks, particularly here in Monroe County, was the fact that lever machines were beginning to fail in many elections across the country. Actually, I can honestly attribute their good name here to my former Republican counterpart, Peter Quinn. And it wasn't that Peter loved the lever machines so much that he didn't want to get rid of them, but he knew them so well. And he could tell you exactly what series of machine was going to have an issue, what the problem was going to be, how he might fix it. Okay? He had a maintenance program that kept us ahead of those failures the rest of the country was experiencing. But he knew, as well as I did, that that aging fleet would not last forever. And to be honest with you, without the kind of maintenance we were doing, those machines would have caused all sorts of problems. The little things that tallied the numbers, the teeth on them could break very easily, which we did have some of those, but not compared to the rest of the country. In most jurisdictions that use lever machines, the machines were owned by the municipality. For example, if we were talking about that here in Rochester, the lever machines would have been owned by the city of Rochester, the town of Rush, the town of Bright. So they ended up in the back of highway garages and stuff like that, and so many other entities. So you can imagine when they dragged them out, okay? So we were lucky from the fact that we were one of 3 counties in the state that owned, where the Board of Elections actually owned the voting machines. And we kept them up good, okay? But now back to Bush versus Gore. It was the tipping point, the point that brought about the Help America Vote Act. And it was a 2000 election disaster. By 2001, hearings had started. Can you imagine, within months of the beginning of the year, in early 2000, April of 2001? And the House introduced a bill in November of 2001 and passed it in December of 2001, 362 yeses against only 63 noes, and 10 members not voting. It was sent over to the Senate. They then passed their version of the bill by April of 2002 by unanimous consent.
Oh my gosh.
Okay. The 2 bills went to conference, and everybody knows that the houses have to have bills that come together in conference and what have you. And they came to an agreement by October of 2002. Okay? April to October. That's not a long time for a bill of this nature, this size. But in October of 2002, the House passed the compromise bill 357 to 48, and the Senate passed the compromise bill 92 to 2, with 6 members not voting. President Bush signed it into law before the end of October. So before the end of 2002, this huge, huge bill, the Help America Vote Act, had been passed. And it did all sorts of things. But it's interesting that, were there issues? I mean, with that kind of votes, 92 to 2, 357 to 48, you would think, oh my gosh, this is just a wonderful bill, the light's shining on it and what have you. Well, there were issues. And interestingly enough, it's kind of like you go back and you realize history. Interestingly enough, the 2 votes against the bill were by our senators, Senator Schumer and Senator Clinton.
No.
So the whole country, they had serious issues regarding the ID requirements in that bill. Okay, now wait a minute. We're back in 2002, and we have 2 senators standing up talking about ID requirements. pretty concerning. Interestingly also was the legislative director of the League of Women Voters of the United States, Lloyd Leonard. Do you remember?
Yeah.
Okay. He expressed doubts about the bill. He claimed that the bill would disenfranchise voters by purging them from the rolls and establishing confusing new identification requirements. 92-2, 357. I think both he and our senators were well aware of the stumbling blocks that would occur. Because for those who lived through that time, the criticism of machines was extensive and went on for years. Although the Election Assistance Commission was created in 2002, when HAVA was signed into law, it was 2007 before the Election Assistance Commission adopted its first version of voluntary voting system guidelines. Okay? Version 1.0. Now, I could also tell you there was a number of other things that got held up, but I want to stay on machines, otherwise I'm sure Barbara will. At any rate, it took 10 years until 2015 before version 1.1 of the voluntary voting system guidelines was adopted. And finally, in 2021, version 2.0 was adopted. So you can see this is not something that people kind of rush to. Now that this law was in place, I think in a lot of ways the EAC realized the depth and importance of what their responsibilities were, and in essence they decided to take their time to make sure they got it right. Okay? As an election commissioner for over 20 years, as someone who worked at the state level, now sitting on a federal agency, I'm going to tell you they did right by doing that. Interestingly enough, New York State was criticized for pushing back for almost 10 years, refusing to buy new machines. And we got criticized over and over and over again. But in that 10 years, fortunately, we were able, and I say we because I was part of that, we were able to convince a number of voting machine manufacturers that paper verifiable ballots were necessary. Okay, machines could not be connected to the internet. The software had to be tested by the state and distributed by them. The vendors could not distribute software ever, even in updates. As a matter of fact, if vendors were prohibited from touching machines, and if they actually had to repair them, that machine required what was called acceptance testing all over again, which means software got ripped out of it, it went all the way back to square one, and there was a massive 20-some page testing process that machine had to go through. Machine was then loaded with software from the state in escrow, and in essence, we made sure that that machine then had no fingerprints from a vendor on it. And people didn't realize that this is what was going on, or this is what would happen. And New York State was a leader in making sure that voting machines were secure, that you could trust them. There was testing up front. There was actually auditing. We had an audit in our whole process, and testing afterwards. It's interesting because in 1990, the National Association of State Election Directors began testing voting machines against standards that they had set. They were a non-governmental entity, and they voluntarily offered the service to states. But the issues caused by the 2000 election kind of changed everybody's thinking and realization that there had to be something more concrete in place. The birth of the EAC, and with that, the various things that it was responsible for. Over the last 23 years, so much has changed regarding voting machines. Paper verifiable ballots are now used in all but a few counties. Notice I didn't say a few states, a few counties. I believe it's in Louisiana. 99% of all ballots cast in the 2024 election were on paper. All the swing states voted on paper. Most states use the voluntary voting system guidelines. Notice I keep saying voluntary, because they're voluntary. That's the only way they can get HAVA passed, the Health American Voting passed. Most states use the voluntary voting system guidelines in their voting system certification process. And while adoption is voluntary, all 50 states and the District of Columbia use the voluntary voting system guidelines, VVSG, as a basis for their approval process. Several states and DC have specifically requirements related to them in their law. 11 states and DC mandate full EAC certification for voting equipment. 18 states and DC require testing according to the federal standards, which includes the voluntary system voting guidelines. 25 states require testing by federally accredited laboratories that test to the voluntary voting system guidelines. It really has been an interesting trip in this 20 plus years. So what does this have to do with the executive order? The EAC was established as an independent agency. 2 Democrats, 2 Republican commissioners head the agency, and a majority, that means 3 votes, are required to take any action. By its very structure, it's an independent body. The EAC is tasked with performing a number of election-related duties. That includes creating and maintaining the VVSG, the Voluntary Voting System Guidelines, creating a national program for testing, certification, and decertification of voting machines, maintaining the National Mail Voter Registration Form required by the National Voter Registration Act of 1993. And I kind of pause at that only because it's a subject I can't talk about because it's the biggest issue in this court, in this executive order that's annoying, but nonetheless. Reporting to Congress every 2 years on the effects of NVRA on elections, administering federal funds to states for HAVA requirements. HAVA had a lot of money in it for counties and states to replace their voting machines because the law prohibited the further use of lever machines and the chads. Oh my gosh. Okay? They recognized that there had to be standards, and those standards had to be different. They administered funds for the development of innovative election technology, including pilot programs to test election technology, studying and reporting best practices of effective administration, and communicating information on laws, technology, procedures, studies, data related to the administration of federal elections to those responsible for formulating or implementing election law and procedures. And they had to make sure that got out also to the media and other interested persons. To be honest with you, if you go on the web and type in eac.gov, and I know that's complicated, eac.gov, you will find a wealth of information, okay? And what has happened in this 22 years is the fact that they actually learned what works and what doesn't. As I mentioned, the chaos we experienced around machines in the first several years of HAVA, we've learned so much more over the 20 years, and frankly, most recently conducted the 2 most secure presidential elections in history, the 2020 and the 2024. Now, despite what you may say or think, people may not like the results, and there's enough of that not liking to go around, I'm sure. But they have stood every challenge from every possible source. Every court has thrown out every challenge. Multiple recounts, Georgia, Arizona. I mean, the list goes on. These machines used in these last two presidential elections have been under more scrutiny than, I mean, you know what you read, but boy, I tell you what, you just have no idea. I had the opportunity to talk to a woman who was part of the Georgia recount. And it's interesting because she was a county clerk responsible for elections in her county. And election process. And then this executive order comes along. The voting machine part, it would decertify every election machine that is out there and apparently establish new standards. Now, mind you, we don't know what those new standards are, but a brief few sentences. And so, given the timing that it would take to develop those standards based on this 3 or 4 sentences, we would have no machines, no certified machines for the 26 midterm elections. To the point where those elections could easily be challenged, and the only option would be to hand count every ballot. Now, you say, well, if you think there were delays in the 2020 election, you have no idea. This could cause months of delay, absolutely months, when in fact, we have standards in place that have weathered the numerous court challenges. So this whole concept of challenging these standards is really absurd. I mean, currently, 99% of all ballots are on paper. They're counted by machines with triggers that require audits, hand counts, with close elections, or when other issues may occur. The bigger argument is that the president has no authority to take control of the elections in the United States. Congress has put in place a strong independent agency to provide support and guidelines to the states, which really own the election process. I mean, that's understood, always has been understood, since the founding of our country. Court challenges have been filed by several national organizations. I mentioned the League, several state agencies. Most agree that they have strong cases. Yet, even if they win in all of them, the situation that we will be dealing with is likely, I don't know, the withholding of funds to states, shutting down cybersecurity support. This is a critical element, and that's already been done. The federal agency that was responsible for overseeing cybersecurity with voting machines has been shut down. It's gone. And the department of the FBI that dealt with that cybersecurity also is out of business. So, unfortunately, we have a lot of problems still in front of us. There's going to be continued lawsuits from that side, saying they're protecting the election, when in actuality, and I'm going to use the term, when in actuality, their only effect is voter suppression. Okay? You know, I could spend hours. I've kind of only touched on the surface on this topic, but there's so much more going on behind the scenes in relationship to voting machines and trying to protect their integrity that I'm just going to ask you to pay a lot more attention. Go out to the eac.gov, really easy, and you'll see just a ton of information. I also have to tell you, how do I put this? I'm really pleased with my counterparts, for the most part, on the advisory board for the EAC. it's kind of by the nature of how it's kind of done. It's split about 50-50. And I don't want to say Democrats and Republicans because you can't really identify them on board. They come from, some of them, yes, because some of them come from political appointments, but also some of them come from organizations. Some of them come from all sorts of entities. As a matter of fact, the National Governors Association, the National Conference of State Legislatures, the National Association of Secretaries of State, the National Association of State Election Directors, the National Association of Counties, the United States Conference of Mayors, the Election Center, the International Association of Government Officials, the United States Commission on Civil Rights, the Architectural and Transportation Barrier Compliance Board. It's a good one. I know it kind of architectural, but they look at how I want to say how you can get to your voting machine. How the polling site is set up. The Office of Public Integrity, U.S. Department of Justice. The Federal Voting Assistance Program. The Speaker of the House has an appointment. The House Minority Leader. The Senate Majority Leader. The Senate Minority Leader. The Chair of the House Administration and the Ranking Member each have appointments. The Senate Rules Committee, both the Ranking Member, the Chair, and the Ranking Member have appointments, and then also included on there is the Designated Federal Officer, and that actually comes from within the EAC itself, that means the 4 commissioners have to agree on an appointment to that board. So it's a really diverse group and what have you, and it was challenged because there was an attempt. We're reappointed every 2 years, and frankly there was some delays in getting appointments this past year around, and what we discovered very quickly was that 2 brand new appointments that were made, and I'm going to be very frank with you, the Speaker of the House, his appointment obviously came from the White House because it was one of the president's former lawyers. So you know about that. And we know of 2 others. And they tried to take 2 seats. We have a 3-member executive committee, a chair, a vice chair, and a secretary. The vice chair is actually chair-elect, and we only elect 2 each year. And these people were just literally weeks before I'd come on, were running for those offices. Now, I wasn't sure, about 4 weeks out from the meeting, 3 weeks out from the meeting, we still hadn't gotten all the appointments made, and I was a little concerned about some of the people who weren't appointed. Well, you know what? It really made me feel good, because the people who had to make those appointments got them done, got them in. We had our meeting about 3 weeks ago, and those people were defeated. And what I found interesting, because of the threats, and I speak about the threats because they're real. It's not like it's even a partisan commentary. The threats to these people are pulling them off the board or what have you. But they were smart enough to vote enough of them so nobody could tell, because it's a secret ballot, who voted how for the people to be the vice chair and the secretary of our board, our advisory board. So it gave me hope, because a number of people spoke against some of the issues that we're dealing with out there. There was a lot of conversation about the executive order, a lot of conversation about the other issues in the executive order and how they don't work, and these came from both sides of the aisle. So with so many people on there that are either election officials today or former election officials, a lot of secretaries of states and stuff like that, it was really encouraging that these people were more concerned about elections and protecting elections than they were about themselves. I say that to give you some hope. Okay? Because as I said, there are many more things coming down. This voting machine issue is one, and a lot of them are right on the plate right now. Thankfully, like I said, the League of Women Voters has won in terms of getting a judge to rule that certain things can't happen in this executive order right now. And frankly, it's a major stop sign in protection to the voters. And I can't tell you how important that is, and that we continue the battle. I've been retired for 5 years now, and 6 years now, and I really, really believe that this fight still has to be had, now more than ever, okay? To talk about all the issues behind the executive order and kind of a corresponding piece, the SAFE Act, which actually has passed the House, but unlikely to pass the Senate. We could do a number of sessions. We could do a whole summer series.
You should.
And talk about those issues. But I guess my one question now is, does everybody understand, or at least now realize that the EAC, EAC.gov, okay, is out there, and to go look it up, and you'll be amazed at the amount of resources there, the amount of information there, and the effort that those people are making to protect elections. Of the 4 commissioners, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, it doesn't mean that the Republicans are all for the ideas that I may have, but at least they're tempered, and there's a discussion. Oh, and there's integrity in the fact that you need 3 votes. 2 Democrats can't do anything without 1 Republican, and 2 Republicans can't do anything without 1 Democrat. And that's what's important. We have to maintain this balance. We have to maintain this independence. We've got to protect our voting machines. We've got to protect a whole bunch of other things, which is mentioned in these both the executive order and in the SAFE Act. And the League of Women Voters, I know, is the place to bring this, because you folks, this is you carry the banner. You have for years, and I know you will continue to do that. So I can't thank you enough for the time. Are there any questions? Yes. Yes.
Is there a channel for influence to the EAC?
I mean, you can certainly send the commissioners, the 4 commissioners, emails. I mean, they have email addresses out there. It's not like they're hiding or anything.
Yeah.
You know, you would think, not knowing them, that, oh, these people, no. You know, we alternate the chair right now. We have the vice chair, Tom Hicks, and I would just send it to all 4 commissioners if you have issues, and don't hesitate to. They're feeling pretty good now about the fact, and now I'm beyond voting machines. The most major thing is the voter registration form, the United States voter registration form. The League of Women Voters stopped the executive order from forcing ID that would literally be unbelievably impossible for people to meet. To be honest with you, the ID required by Trump's executive order and the SAFE Act don't even agree with each other. Okay? Women, if you got married and you had to move, you would not be able to register to vote again. I'm not kidding. Passports. I mean, only we think because we have one that it's, oh, everybody does, but that's not the case at all. And what this problem is, the people that support these 2 documents have the audacity to suggest, well, the enhanced, yeah, well, no, if you read both of them, no, it doesn't. It doesn't meet the requirements. I mean, it's an outright lie. Just go read them. Go look up the executive order, look up the SAFE Act, and it's like, no. Based on what they have to say on them, it doesn't meet the requirements. So, again, I know I'm speaking to the choir, but I'm speaking to the choir because you all sing so well. And I appreciate my experiences with you and over the years, the things that I brought to you, and you worked with me when I was a commissioner. I can't thank you enough for that, and wish you a good night.
The summer series. As we talked about what he talked about, he said, well, I can't go into that, that'll take too long, I can't. But, you know, I have half an hour, and I said, no, we need the whole series, so I'm serious.
And you volunteered, so now it's a deal.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm thrilled to participate, by all means, but I think there's other people we can also bring into
We'll
it.
talk to you and we'll get them.
Thank you.